On our silver wedding anniversary, my husband handed me divorce papers instead of a gift. 25 years is enough, he declared in front of our guests. I stood frozen, the room spinning as he added, I need someone who matches my ambition. You have until tomorrow to leave the house. He forgot that house was mine before we ever met. His mother, Patricia, just smirked from the corner. If this pain feels familiar, join me by subscribing. Let's share these stories of strength together. I'm Sophia Bennett, and this is how my world unraveled and how I stitched it back together. It began 3 weeks before that night, in our quiet Bethesda home, where the air smelled of cedar from the candles I lit to calm my nerves. I was 49, a financial analyst at Meridian Partners, my days filled with spreadsheets and deadlines. My husband, Thomas Reed, 52, was a charismatic executive. His laughter once the soundtrack of my life. We'd built a world together. No children, though we dreamed of them, imagining a nursery painted soft yellow tiny shoes by the door. Instead, we filled our life with trips to Paris, cozy evenings by the fireplace, weekends at our cabin in the Maryland woods, and plans for a future that felt certain. Or so I thought, as I stood in our kitchen, the October chills seeping through the window panes, my fingers tracing the edge of a chipped mug we'd bought on our honeymoon. It was 2 a.m. when I woke to Thomas whispering in the hallway, his voice a low hum cutting through the silence of our home. The floorboards creaked under his weight, each sound a stab to my chest. We need to make it quick, Mom. She can't know until the party, he said, his tone sharp, urgent. I lay still, my heart thumping against the cool cotton sheets, catching fragments of Patricia's reply through the phone's static. She'll be blindsided, she said, her voice cold, calculated. Just stick to the plan. Plan? My stomach twisted, a sour knot forming. Why now? Weeks before our 25th anniversary, when we were supposed to celebrate a quarter century of love. I squeezed my eyes shut as Thomas crept back into bed, his body tense, radiating unease. I pretended to sleep, but my mind raced, replaying every moment of doubt I'd buried over the years, the late nights, his distracted glances, the way he'd stopped holding my hand. Morning came, gray light filtering through the curtains, the scent of rain lingering outside. Thomas was all smiles, but they felt forced, like a mask slipping. Sophia, darling, he said, brushing my cheek with fingers that felt too cold. Let's pick a venue for our anniversary. Something grand. His cologne was sharp, unfamiliar, not the warm cedarwood he'd worn for years. In 25 years, he'd never cared about party planning. I was the one who chose the restaurants, booked the flights, picked the sage green paint for our living room walls. His sudden enthusiasm was a red flag, waving in the quiet of our kitchen. Sure, I said, my voice steady, but my eyes tracked his every move. He left his phone on the counter, and when it buzzed, I glanced at the screen. A reminder, call Elle at 10 a.m. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral, stirring sugar into my coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the mug. Who's Elle? I asked, pouring him a cup, my tone light as the steam rising between us. Thomas froze, his hand pausing midair, then recovered with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Oh, Lawson, a client from Chicago. Work stuff. But his jaw twitched, a tell I'd known since we met at a college mixer in 1996, when he'd nervously confessed he'd spilled wine on my dress. He was lying. I smiled, but my chest tightened, a dull ache spreading. Lawson, that name felt like a cover, a flimsy excuse hiding something or someone else. After he left, his briefcase clicking shut like a judge's gavel, I stood by the window, watching crimson leaves drift to the ground, each one a piece of my trust falling away. We'd met as dreamers, he all charm and big ideas. I, the practical one, balancing his spontaneity. We married young, dreaming of children, but the nursery stayed empty. Doctors called it unexplained infertility, a clinical term that couldn't capture the grief of negative tests, the silent drives home from appointments. Thomas grew distant. Patricia's quiet barbs about my failure to give her grandchildren stung. We pivoted to careers, to travel, but a crack had formed, invisible until now. That afternoon, Patricia's knock was sharp, like a warning. She stepped inside without asking, her perfume heavy with jasmine, her smile as cold as the marble floor. "Sophia, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "are you ready for the big day?" She'd never embraced me as family, always holding me at arm's length, as if I were a temporary fixture in her son's life. I led her to the sofa, the cushions sinking slightly under her weight. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the modest bookshelves, the framed photo of Thomas and me in Venice, our smiles frozen in happier times. "A restaurant is best," she said, adjusting her scarf. "Home parties lack prestige." Then, too casually, "Where do you keep the house deed? For, future planning." My skin prickled, a chill running down my spine despite the warm throw blanket on my lap. "In the safe," I said, my voice even though my fingers tightened around my teacup. "Why?" She waved a hand, her rings glinting. "Just thinking of Thomas's nephews. Family security." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and I felt the weight of her judgment, as if my home, my sanctuary, wasn't enough. When she left, her heels clicking on the hardwood, I sat in the silence, piecing together the fragments. Thomas's late-night call, his forced affection, Patricia's probing. The air felt heavy, charged with betrayal. I tried Thomas's laptop, my hands trembling as I typed our first date, April 12, 1998. The password failed. My pulse raced, a drumbeat in my ears. I tried his birthday, nothing. On a whim, I entered our wedding date backward. The screen unlocked, and his browser history hit me like a slap. How to divorce with shared property. Asset division laws in Maryland, protecting your home in a split. Pages from the past month, each one a knife to my heart. I stared at the screen, the blue light harsh against my eyes, wondering how the man who'd once danced with me in our kitchen could plan this in secret. My phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Rachel, my friend from yoga, her voice tight with urgency. "Sophia, I saw Thomas at a jewelry store in Rockville with a young woman. They were picking out necklaces. She was all over him, laughing, touching his arm." I swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising. What did she look like? Maybe 28, brunette, flashy coat, maybe Prada, very confident, like she owned the place. I thanked her, my voice steady, but inside I was crumbling, the ground shifting beneath me. That night Thomas came home with lilies, their cloying scent filling the room. I hated lilies, they reminded me of funerals. "For my forever love," he said, kissing me, his lips cold. The irony burned a fire in my chest. I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I'd loved. "We need to talk about our future, Thomas." He stiffened, his smile faltering. "After the party, okay? Let's keep the mood light." I nodded, but my mind was a storm, and I knew he didn't suspect I'd found my leverage. The next morning, while he showered, the water hissing behind the closed door, I grabbed his phone. It was locked, but I tried March 8th, Women's Day, a date that felt like a cruel joke. It opened. Texts from Lila flooded the screen, each one a dagger. "T, you said we'd be together by Christmas." "I'm done hiding," Thomas's reply. "Patience, love. After the party, it's done. The house will be ours. Mom's handling the lawyer." Lila again. "You promised me a life. Don't mess this up." A lawyer, Kessler, was mentioned. "Kessler says if we push her emotionally, she'll sign the waiver." My knees buckled and I gripped the counter, the cold granite grounding me. They were plotting to take my house, my parents' gift, the one I'd chosen with them in 1997, its white shutters and wide porch, a symbol of their love for me. I called Nina, my college friend turned divorce attorney, her voice a lifeline through the phone. "Sophia, what's wrong?" she asked, sensing the tremor in my tone. I need advice. Hypothetically, a woman's husband is planning a divorce and hiding it. Nina didn't buy the pretense. "Come to my office, now." Her downtown DC firm smelled of polished wood and coffee, and as I sank into a leather chair, I spilled everything. The calls, the texts, Patricia's questions. My hands shook and I clasped them tightly, the knuckles whitening. Nina leaned forward, her eyes sharp. The house, is it in your name? My parents gave it to me in 1997 before we married. Thomas was added later. She nodded, a spark of hope in her gaze. That's your ace. It's premarital property. He can't touch it unless he proves significant investment, which I doubt he did. Relief flooded me, warm and fleeting, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Gather evidence, she said. Messages, bank statements. Move money to a solo account. And don't let them know you're on to them. I left her office. The city's hum, car horns, distant chatter, grounding me as I clutched her advice like a lifeline. Back home, the mailbox held a letter from a London notary, the envelope crisp and heavy. My Uncle Henry, my mother's brother, had died, leaving me his estate, an apartment in London worth $900,000, a cottage in Cornwall worth $400,000 and $600,000 in cash. I hadn't told Thomas, planning to surprise him on our anniversary with dreams of a European adventure. Now it was my salvation. I stood in the living room, the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air, and opened a new bank account online, transferring half our joint savings, $25,000. I noticed additional withdrawals, thousands unaccounted for, likely loans Thomas had taken. The numbers glowed on the screen, a quiet rebellion. If Thomas wanted to fund his betrayal, he'd use his own money. I sat back, the leather chair creaking, and let the weight of my decision settle. For the first time, I felt a spark of control, fragile but real. By 15% into this nightmare, I struck back quietly. I met Mr. Larson, the lawyer who'd handled our house purchase, in his cluttered Bethesda office, the air thick with old paper and ink. "Sophia Bennett," he said warmly, his glasses slipping down his nose. "How's Thomas?" "I need a favor," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Can you confirm the house deed?" He pulled a dusty file, his fingers tracing the pages. "Your parents gifted it to you alone, June 15, 1997. Thomas was added post-marriage." I smiled, a small victory. "Can I get a certified copy?" "Tomorrow," he said, his eyes kind but curious. That document was my shield, a tangible piece of my past that Thomas couldn't touch. As I left, the autumn air was crisp, the leaves crunching underfoot, and I felt a flicker of the girl I'd been, fearless, ready to fight. The anniversary loomed, a shadow over every moment. Thomas booked the Mayflower Hotel's grand ballroom for 120 guests, costing $50,000 from our savings. "It's our silver milestone," he said, his grin too wide, his eyes avoiding mine. "Everyone needs to see our happiness." The hypocrisy stung, a sharp pain behind my ribs. I nodded, stirring my tea, the spoon clinking rhythmically. Patricia visited, her heels clicking as she handed me a card. "A gift, Sophia," she said, her voice syrupy. "It was for Kessler and Associates, divorce lawyers. Just in case," she added, her eyes gleaming with malice. I thanked her, my voice tight, my fingers crumpling the card's edge. She was part of this, her loyalty to Thomas, a blade aimed at my back. That night, as Thomas slept, I sat in the dark, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I overheard him rehearsing his speech in his study, the door slightly ajar, his voice low and deliberate. "Friends, 25 years is a milestone, but people change. I've outgrown this marriage. Sophia deserves honesty. Honesty." The word was a mockery, echoing in my mind as I clutched my folder. Deed, inheritance papers, bank statements. My hands trembled, but my resolve hardened. I was ready, though fear gnawed at me, whispering doubts. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I lose everything? I pushed them away, focusing on the weight of the papers, my anchor in the storm. The morning of the party, I had scheduled an early morning visit to the British Embassy to finalize the inheritance. The marble halls were cool and echoing. The official, a kind woman with gray-streaked hair, handed me the inheritance documents. "The London apartment and Cornwall cottage are yours. The $600,000 transfers next week." I left, my purse heavy with power, the city's pulse, buses rumbling, pedestrians chatting, matching my own. At home, Thomas was giddy, adjusting his tie in the mirror, the scent of his new cologne sharp. Tonight's special, Sophia. Life-changing. For both of us, I said, my voice calm, though my heart raced. I slipped into a navy dress, its silk cool against my skin, and tucked the folder into my purse, its weight a reminder of my strength. At the Mayflower, the ballroom glowed with silver decor, crystal chandeliers casting light that danced on the walls. The air smelled of roses and champagne, the clink of glasses mingling with soft jazz. Guests mingled, colleagues, family, friends, their laughter a stark contrast to my tension. Lila, the brunette, stood in a corner, introduced as Thomas's consultant. She was 28, polished, her eyes sharp as she sipped wine, her dress hugging her frame. Patricia beamed, shaking hands like a queen, her perfume overwhelming. A man in a suit, Kessler, sat discreetly, his gaze fixed on me, a predator waiting. The MC's voice cut through the chatter. Thomas Reed has words for his wife. Thomas took the microphone, his smile wide, his hands steady. 25 years is a lifetime, he began, his voice smooth, practiced. But sometimes you realize you've grown apart. Sophia's been comfortable, but I need more. I'm filing for divorce. She'll leave the house by tomorrow. Gasps rippled through the room, forks clattering against plates. Patricia nodded approvingly, her lips curling. Lila smirked, her eyes glinting with victory. I felt the room tilt, my breath catching, but I refused to break. I'd known this was coming, yet the public betrayal burned, a fire in my veins. I thought of our first dance, his hand warm in mine, and wondered where that man had gone. I stood, my heels steady on the polished floor, and took the microphone, my fingers brushing his, cold and unfamiliar. Thank you, Thomas, for your honesty. My voice was steady, though my heart pounded, a drum beat echoing the waves I'd hear later in Cornwall. But I have some truths, too. I've known about your plan for weeks. Lila, Kessler, your mother's scheming. Thomas paled, his jaw dropping. The house? It's mine, gifted by my parents in 1997. Here's the deed, dated June 15, 1997. I held up the document, its edges crisp, the notary's seal gleaming, and my uncle's inheritance, $1,900,000 in property and cash, secures my future. The room buzzed, whispers rising like a tide. You spent $50,000 of our savings on this spectacle, I continued, my voice rising slightly, fueled by years of quiet sacrifice. But I'm done. I'm filing for divorce. Enjoy your freedom, Thomas. Chaos erupted, a cacophony of shouts and clinking glasses. You're despicable, a colleague yelled at Thomas, his face red with indignation. Lila tried to slip out, her heels clicking frantically, but co-workers blocked her, their voices sharp. Homewrecker, one hissed, her wine glass trembling. Patricia's face crumpled, her hands clutching her purse as if it could shield her. Kessler vanished, his chair empty, a ghost in the chaos. My boss, Miss Harper, approached Thomas, her voice cold. Your conduct is a disgrace. We'll discuss your role Monday. Thomas stammered, his tie askew, but no one listened. I stood tall, the chandelier light warm on my face, and felt a surge of pride. I wasn't the broken woman he'd expected. I walked out, the night air cool against my flushed cheeks, the city lights sparkling like stars. They echoed the freedom in my heart, a promise of a new beginning. I paused, glancing back at the hotel, the windows glowing with the chaos I'd left behind. Thomas stood alone, his silhouette small against the grandeur, a man undone by his own arrogance. I breathed deeply, the scent of rain and asphalt grounding me, and knew I'd won, not just the house, but myself. 3 months later, in a D.C. courtroom, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and tension, the judge ruled the Bethesda house is Miss Bennett's premarital property, gifted June 15, 1997. Mr. Reed owes $38,000 in debts from unauthorized loans, $20,000 from Chase, $18,000 from Citi. Thomas, haggard in a cheap suit, got half our cabin and car. I got everything else, my folder of documents a silent victory. As the gavel struck, I felt a weight lift, the final note in a song I'd been singing alone for years. Outside, Thomas called my name, his voice cracked. Forgive me, Sophia. I was a fool. I looked at him, his eyes tired, and saw no trace of the man I'd loved. I wish you well, Thomas, I said, but we're done. I walked to my new Audi, its leather seats warm, a gift from my inheritance, and drove away, the city fading in my rearview mirror. I moved to the Cornwall cottage, a quaint stone house where the sea's salt air mingled with wildflowers. The waves crashed below, a rhythm that soothed my soul. I left Meridian to start a financial literacy nonprofit, teaching women to protect their assets, to stand firm as I had. Each workshop, filled with eager faces, felt like a step toward healing, their stories echoing mine. Thomas lost his job. The viral video of his speech, shared with the Silver Traitor hashtag, tanked his reputation. He drives for a rideshare now, living with Patricia in a cramped apartment, their voices bickering through thin walls. Lila married a tech mogul, her Instagram posts dripping with smug luxury, gold rings, private jets. I didn't care. I was free, my days filled with purpose, my nights with the sound of the sea. That first night in Cornwall, I stood on the cliff, the waves crashing below, their roar matching the heartbeat I'd felt when I faced Thomas in that ballroom. The stars above were bright, unyielding like the strength I'd found within. I was no victim. I was Sophia, unbroken, my life a canvas I'd paint anew. What's your story? Share it in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if my journey resonates, subscribe to my channel for more stories of strength. Let's walk this path together.